The quarterback position is one of the most highly coveted positions in the draft. Year after year, many quarterbacks are taken early in the first round in the hopes of transforming a franchise. However, there are some insane quarterbacks who were never taken early on in the draft or even drafted at all. Today, we'll be going over some of the best undrafted quarterbacks in history. Jeff Garcia's NFL story reads like a guy who got invited to the party through the back door, then stayed long enough to end up on the VIP list. He wasn't drafted, he wasn't even in the league for his early 20s. He was out in the Canadian Football League slinging passes in frozen stadiums for the Calgary Stampeders, where he looked like someone trying to cosplay as Doug Flutie. But the man could ball. Eventually, he found his way to the NFL and got his shot with the San Francisco 49ers, trying to fill Steve Young's cleats, which is like being handed a Fender Stratocaster and told to go on after Jimi Hendrix. And yet, somehow, Garcia didn't flop. He dropped 4,278 yards and 31 touchdowns in his first full year as a starter. That's not good for a backup or pretty decent for an undrafted guy. That's Pro Bowl level quarterbacking in a city still hungover from Joe Montana nostalgia. He went to 3 straight Pro Bowls from 2000 to 2002 and led San Francisco to the playoffs in 2 of those years, including that absolute fever dream of a comeback against the Giants in 2002. You remember that one. Down 38-14 in the second half, Garcia basically said screw it and turned into a Red Bull fueled Brett Favre. He threw for 331 yards, rushed for 60 more, and accounted for 4 total touchdowns as the Niners won 39-38. That game was so insane, it felt illegal. Now, Garcia was never an elite arm talent. He didn't have that bazooka like Favre or that surgical touch like Brady. But what he did have was pure chaos energy and zero fear. The man played with the attitude of a bar fighter who also happened to study game film all night. He was tough as hell, mobile, and always up for a fourth quarter gunfight. And even after his time in San Francisco fizzled, he bounced around the league like a quarterbacking nomad. Cleveland, Detroit, Philly, Tampa. Everywhere he went, he found a way to make noise. He took over for the Eagles in 2006 after McNabb got hurt and led them to the playoffs. Philly fans were so stunned they almost cheered on purpose. In total, Garcia threw for over 25,000 yards and 161 touchdowns in the NFL alone, not counting the 16,000 plus yards and 100 plus scores he stacked up in the CFL. Add it all up and you've got one of the best undrafted quarterback careers of all time. Not bad for a guy nobody wanted, who didn't even sniff a college football powerhouse, and who had to claw his way into relevance by lighting up frozen Canadian skies. Jeff Garcia isn't just a stat sheet, he's a damn folktale. The CFL cast-off turned Pro Bowler, the backup turned playoff hero. He's proof that if you've got guts, grit, and a little bit of crazy, you don't need a draft day phone call. You just need one chance, and the will to never give it back. Jake Delhomme was the kind of quarterback who made you believe anything was possible, for better or worse. The man looked like he woke up every Sunday and said, yup, today's the day I'm throwing for 300 yards and 3 interceptions, and you're just gonna have to live with it. But for a brief, glorious stretch in the early 2000s, Delhomme was the chaotic, good QB the Panthers didn't deserve, but absolutely needed. Undrafted out of the football factory that is Southwestern Louisiana, now Louisiana Lafayette, Delhomme bounced around NFL practice squads like a guy trying to crash the wrong party. After spending years in NFL Europe and the Saints bench graveyard, he finally got his shot with the Carolina Panthers in 2003. And what did he do? Nothing much, just led one of the unlikeliest Super Bowl runs of the modern era. Let's talk about that 03 season for a second. Jake Delhomme didn't just manage games or protect the football, he was slinging it with reckless abandon, like a man playing Madden on rookie difficulty but without the skills to back it up. And it worked. The Panthers went 11-5 and Delhomme pulled off comeback after comeback, earning the nickname Cardiac Cats for the squad. Then came the Super Bowl against Tom Brady and the Patriots. Delhomme threw for 323 yards, 3 TDs, and a 113.6 passer rating, in what might be the most slept-on Super Bowl QB performance of all time. He tied the game late in the 4th with a 12-yard bomb to Ricky Proehl, only for Adam Vinatieri to ruin everything with a field goal. Again. From there, Delhomme became the unquestioned starter in Carolina, and for a few seasons, things looked steady. He had the Steve Smith connection, a decent defense, and just enough chaos in him to win games nobody thought they would. But let's not sugarcoat it. When Delhomme fell off, he fell hard. In the 2008 playoffs, he threw 5 interceptions and fumbled once in a loss to the Cardinals that looked like a live-action horror movie. Panthers fans still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. By the time his career wrapped up in Cleveland and Houston, because where else do quarterbacks go to fade into the abyss, Delhomme had racked up over 20,000 passing yards, 126 touchdowns, and one unforgettable Super Bowl run that defied every expectation. He may never get a gold jacket, but in Carolina, he'll always be the guy who made fans believe that an undrafted Cajun gunslinger could almost take down a dynasty. Delhomme was never supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to start, wasn't supposed to win, and sure as hell wasn't supposed to go toe-to-toe with Tom Brady in February. But he did. And for that brief window of time, Jake Delhomme was pure, glorious madness in cleats, and we loved every second of it. Jim Hart might be the most statistically impressive quarterback that nobody under the age of 50 has ever heard of. He was undrafted out of Southern Illinois in 1966, yes, Southern Illinois, and somehow turned that into an 18-year NFL career. Almost all of it with the St. Louis Cardinals, back when they were a football team and not just a baseball reference. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't mobile, he looked like your dad's accountant. But Hart could sling it, and by the time he walked away from the game, he'd thrown for over 34,000 yards and 209 touchdowns. Numbers that had him in the top 10 all time when he retired. Let that marinate. Top 10, and he wasn't even drafted. Now, did Jim Hart ever win a Super Bowl? No. Did he even sniff one? Also no. In fact, his teams were so up and down, they basically lived in the NFL's version of purgatory. Just good enough to stay relevant, just flawed enough to miss the dance. But that wasn't always his fault. The Cardinals in the 70s had some serious offensive firepower under head coach Don Coryell, aka the godfather of the Air Coryell passing attack. And Hart was the one pulling the trigger. He made 4 Pro Bowls, had multiple 3,000-yard seasons back when that meant something, and finished top 5 in passing touchdowns 3 times. He was consistently productive during an era when throwing the ball 30 times a game was considered reckless behavior. And here's the thing about Hart. The man was durable. He played forever, like Brett Favre's uncle levels of longevity. From 1966 to 1984, he stayed upright through broken plays, bad O-lines, and defenses that treated quarterbacks like crash test dummies. It wasn't pretty, but it was consistent, and that kind of reliability was worth its weight in gold in the pre-turf toe era. But the lack of postseason success always hung around him like a rain cloud. The Cardinals made the playoffs only 3 times during his tenure and never got past the divisional round. Hart never got that moment that cements a QB in the minds of fans. No miracle playoff win, no legendary shootout, no highlight clip they run every January. He was just there, producing, surviving, doing the job. Still, when you zoom out, Jim Hart deserves way more respect than he gets. He wasn't a flash in the pan or some fan favorite novelty. He was a legit starter for nearly 2 decades who piled up stats at a time when the rules favored the defense, not the quarterback. If he'd done what he did in the 2000s instead of the 70s, we'd probably be arguing about whether he was a Hall of Famer. Instead, he's a trivia answer. A footnote, a guy who quietly proved that being undrafted doesn't mean being unsuccessful. It just means you have to hang around long enough to force people to notice. Dave Krieg is the guy you'd cast in a football movie if the plot called for a humble, blue-collar backup quarterback who accidentally becomes a franchise legend. Except Krieg did it in real life, over 19 freaking seasons. Undrafted out of the football powerhouse that is Milton College, which no longer even exists, by the way. Krieg's NFL origin story feels made up, like he showed up in Seahawks camp in 1980, the 4th QB on the depth chart, probably had to borrow a helmet, and somehow ended up starting games by his 2nd year. And then he never really stopped. Krieg went from complete unknown to full-time starter and wound up becoming the Seahawks' all-time passing leader before a guy named Matt Hasselbeck eventually knocked him off the throne. He put up over 38,000 passing yards and 261 touchdowns, numbers that are Hall of Fame adjacent and flat-out insane for an undrafted guy from a school with fewer students than your average Chipotle. Krieg was the definition of scrappy. He didn't have the strongest arm, the fastest legs, or the flashiest highlights, but what he did have was moxie, weird pocket movement, and an unshakable ability to not die on the field. The dude took 484 career sacks. That's 2nd all time behind Brett Favre. He got hit so many times, it's a miracle he still remembers his own name. One time against the Raiders, Krieg got sacked 7 times by Derek Thomas and still won the game by ducking an 8th sack and throwing a game-winning touchdown. That's not football, that's divine intervention. He made 3 Pro Bowls, led Seattle to multiple playoff berths, and was a consistent presence during an era when quarterbacks were disposable unless your name was Montana or Marino. And even after the Seahawks moved on, Krieg bounced around the league like your favorite journeyman uncle. He played for the Chiefs, Lions, Cardinals, Bears, and finally the Titans. Everywhere he went, he was that veteran guy you threw in when things got desperate, and more often than not, he kept you afloat. Statistically, he was quietly elite. At the time of his retirement in 1998, Krieg ranked top 10 all-time in passing yards and touchdowns. Yet nobody really talks about him. Why? Because he didn't win a Super Bowl, wasn't flashy, and his career highlight reel looks like it was filmed on a VHS tape with water damage. But if you were around in the 80s and early 90s, you knew. Dave Krieg was a gamer. He may not have had the poster on the wall, but he was the guy your team dreaded playing in a close game. Dave Krieg is the football version of duct tape. Not sexy, not flashy, but it gets the job done, and somehow holds everything together way longer than it should. He's not just one of the best undrafted quarterbacks ever, he's one of the most underrated QBs, period. Tony Romo was never supposed to be the guy. He was supposed to be a clipboard holder, a camp body, a trivia question about which QB backed up Quincy Carter. Coming out of Eastern Illinois in 2003, Romo went undrafted and barely even got invited to the party. If not for a last-minute call from Cowboys assistant Sean Payton, yep, that Sean Payton, he probably ends up selling insurance or coaching high school ball. Instead, he somehow became the face of the freaking Dallas Cowboys for a decade. Let's be clear, Romo was electric. He played quarterback like he was in a backyard game with his cousins on Thanksgiving, off script, on the run, pulling magic out of thin air like a magician in a 2-minute drill. He didn't just make plays, he created them, whether it was juking out a defender to launch a 30-yard rope or dodging 5 sacks to hit Witten on a crosser. Romo's improvisation bordered on streetball artistry, and when it worked, it was beautiful. When it didn't, oh man, buckle up. Statistically, Romo was lights out. He threw for over 34,000 yards, 248 touchdowns, and had a career passer rating of 97.1, one of the best of his era. 4 Pro Bowls, multiple 4,000-yard seasons, the highest fourth quarter passer rating in NFL history at one point. And yet, for most of his career, Romo was treated like a walking punchline. Why? Because when he failed, he did it in prime time. The botched field goal hold in the 2006 wildcard game, iconic for all the wrong reasons. The 5-pick meltdown against the Bills, which he still won, a meme in the making. Tony Romo could go from surgical to tragic in the span of 2 drives. He was basically the human embodiment of Cowboys fandom. But here's the thing, Romo carried some brutal Dallas rosters. Mediocre defenses, inconsistent coaching, O-lines that were human turnstiles, he dragged them all to relevance. And when he finally got a supporting cast with DeMarco Murray and the Great Wall of Dallas in 2014, he had an MVP-level season. The Cowboys went 12-4, Romo led the league in passer rating, and they came within 1 Dez Bryant non-catch of potentially going to the NFC Championship. And let's be honest, that was a catch. By the time injuries caught up to him, cracked collarbones, herniated discs, the whole horror show, it felt like Romo had given every ounce of magic his body had to offer. He got replaced by a rookie named Dak Prescott, and just like that, his playing career was over. No Super Bowl ring, no parade, no fairy tale ending. But if you're talking about pure talent, leadership, and clutch play, Romo had all of it. He just happened to play during a time when the Cowboys were always almost. Warren Moon didn't just break records, he broke the whole damn system. You want to talk about an undrafted quarterback? Moon wasn't just undrafted, he was ignored, overlooked, straight up blackballed. Coming out of the University of Washington, where he won a Rose Bowl MVP and looked every bit like a future NFL starter, scouts still gave him the cold shoulder. Why? Because in the 1970s, the unspoken rule in NFL front offices was that black quarterbacks weren't fit to run an offense. So Moon took his arm, his pride, and his cannon of a deep ball north of the border and set the CFL on fire like a man possessed. He joined the Edmonton Eskimos and won 5 straight Grey Cups, which is Canadian for yeah, we dominated. In 6 CFL seasons, he threw for nearly 22,000 yards and became an absolute legend. And only then, after years of proving he was more than good enough, did NFL teams come knocking. Moon entered the league at 28 years old, with a chip on his shoulder big enough to require its own helmet. From 1984 onward, Moon made up for lost time by throwing everyone into oblivion. He passed for 49,325 yards and 291 touchdowns in the NFL NFL alone. That doesn't include the CFL stats. If you combine both leagues, he's over 70,000 passing yards. That's more than Brett Favre, more than Dan Marino, and again, he didn't even get a shot in the NFL until his late 20s. Moon was the king of the deep ball. His spiral was so tight, it looked animated. With the Houston Oilers run-and-shoot offense, he was out there playing 90s football like it was the 2020s. 4 wide, shotgun snaps, bombs away. He had 9 Pro Bowls, led the league in passing yards twice, and dropped a 527-yard passing game in 1990 like it was nothing. To this day, that's still one of the highest single-game passing totals in history. But Moon's legacy isn't just stats. He was the first black quarterback inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He kicked the door down for guys like Randall Cunningham, Donovan McNabb, Steve McNair, and eventually Patrick Mahomes. He didn't just prove a point, he changed the narrative. He showed that the old excuses, they can't read defenses, they can't handle the pressure, they're better off switching positions, were exactly what they sounded like. Racist garbage. And despite all that adversity, Moon never acted bitter. He just kept slinging it. For 2 decades, across 2 leagues and 2 countries, the man did nothing but cook defenses and rewrite record books. Warren Moon didn't just belong in the league, he should have owned it from day one. And yet, even starting 5 years late, he still ended up as one of the most prolific passers of all time. Undrafted? Technically, sure. But by the end of his career, there was no doubt. Warren Moon was the prototype. Kurt Warner's story doesn't sound real. It sounds like something Disney would write, then toss in the trash because it's too corny. Undrafted out of northern Iowa, stocking shelves at a Hy-Vee grocery store, begging frozen peas in one hand while dreaming of NFL glory with the other, the man was working for $5.50 an hour when most future Hall of Famers were learning West Coast offenses and getting fitted for draft day suits. He played in the Arena Football League, he played in NFL Europe, he took a football road trip through hell with a detour through Belgium, and somehow wound up in the Hall of Fame. But let's rewind. Warner got no love coming out of college. He had the arm, but scouts questioned everything else. His speed, his competition level, his readiness. He got a training camp invite with the Packers in 1994 and was cut faster than you can say Brett Favre. So he bounced. Arena football with the Iowa Barnstormers. He turned that league into a laser light show. Fast reads, tighter windows, and absolute chaos. And he thrived. His numbers were stupid. 183 touchdowns in 3 seasons. Eventually, the Rams gave him a shot, and here's where the fairy tale turns into a full-blown movie script. In 1999, Rams starting QB Trent Green tore his ACL in the preseason, and the NFL world shrugged. That team was toast. No way this unknown backup could salvage anything. Then Kurt Warner steps in, and in his first year as a starter, he literally has one of the greatest seasons in NFL history. We're talking 4,353 yards, 41 touchdowns, a 109.2 passer rating, and MVP honors. He led the Rams, yes, the Rams, to a 13-3 record and a Super Bowl title. The greatest show on turf was born, and Warner was the ringleader. In the Super Bowl, he threw for 414 yards, still the most ever in a regulation-length Super Bowl, and delivered the game-winning 73-yard bomb to Isaac Bruce. Oh, and he won Super Bowl MVP, because of course he did. But this wasn't a one-hit wonder. Warner won another MVP in 2001, took the Rams back to the Super Bowl, and came up just short against a little-known guy named Tom Brady in one of the biggest upsets in sports history. He went from unknown to NFL royalty in the span of 2 years, and even after injuries and bad coaching decisions forced him into the shadows, hi Giants, Warner found one more chapter left in the book, this time in Arizona. At age 37, when most quarterbacks are golfing full-time or fumbling through bad Monday Night Football gigs, Warner was leading the Cardinals, yes, the historically cursed, perennially hopeless Arizona Cardinals, to the Super Bowl. In 2008, he threw for 4,583 yards, 30 touchdowns, and nearly pulled off one of the biggest miracles in football history. He and Larry Fitzgerald put on an absolute clinic in that postseason, and Warner torched the Steelers for 377 yards in Super Bowl 43. He would have been MVP again if not for the defense forgetting how time works in the final 2 minutes and Santonio Holmes. By the time he retired, Kurt Warner had thrown for 32,344 yards and 208 touchdowns in the NFL. Add in his arena and NFL Europe numbers, and he's got a case as one of the most productive quarterbacks in history across all leagues. But even more than the stats or the rings, what defines Warner is that he wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to make a roster, wasn't supposed to be MVP, wasn't supposed to be in the Hall of Fame. He's the ultimate underdog. The football version of Rocky Balboa if Rocky won twice and then came back in his late 30s to win again. He's proof that talent doesn't always show up in scouting reports, that resilience matters more than pedigree, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guy actually wins. Kurt Warner didn't sneak into NFL greatness. He kicked the damn door down with a cart full of groceries and never looked back. There you have it, some of the best quarterbacks in NFL history that never even got a sniff in the draft. It just goes to show that sometimes the best talent is straight up ignored, while players taken first overall tend to flame out quickly. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to press the like button and comment down below. If you really enjoyed, subscribe and check out our last video about the 10 greatest wide receivers of all time.